In today's video, we are going to go and we are going to learn how to do a quilt block that's very relevant to a day that's coming next week. Spoiler alert, it's Valentine's Day. But today we're going to learn how to do this heart quilt block. And I'm always using scraps because scraps are the best. And yeah, it is not nearly as complicated as it looks. I will give you all of the steps and all of the tips, all of the tricks, and all of the mistakes that I always make whenever I'm doing a project. But grab your sewing gear, let's get to it and learn how to make this fun little block. Alright, so first off, you're going to need your material and all of your sewing gear. Of course, get that first. I am really enjoying my new sewing mat that I told you all about last week's video. But first off, you're going to get your pattern together. Now, this is just a little easy pattern that I've seen online. And basically, these are the types of squares that you're going to need to make this block. And what I like to do is get everything laid out and get everything together so that whenever I put the puzzle together, essentially, it makes things a lot easier. But here are the items that you're going to need based off of our quilt block here. Now, I did draw it out on a piece of grid paper, and there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. There's actually a row, that second row can actually be a full piece of material. But because I like to use scraps, I am making each of the squares individual. But you can also take those 4 squares in the middle and you can add additional half square triangles, or you can mix up the fabric. For this quilt block, I'm actually going to be using this cat fabric and this pink floral material. Now, one thing that you do want to pay attention to, and that is going to make a difference with this block, is if you're using a directional print like this cat fabric, there's a couple things that you're going to want to be aware of. And there is one crucial part towards the end of the video that I did not realize until the very end. But that's why I always cut a few extra pieces in case something happens. But with this particular material, you want to make sure that your diagonals are going to be on the correct sides. And when I was looking at the pattern and trying to figure out like, oh, this one can go with this one and this material can go on this side, and figuring out how many that I needed, like I said, there was one crucial mistake that I made, and I did not realize it until I was assembling the block. And yeah, but I will go over that so that you won't have to make the same mistake as me. Now we're going to assemble our HSTs, and we're going to put pretty sides together and have them on a diagonal just like this. We're going to draw a straight line right down the middle of that diagonal. I'm using my favorite little marking pen, which has ink that goes away with an iron, so it will disappear at the end of the process. But we're going to mark a line right down the center of that diagonal, and we are going to sew 2 seams on both sides of that line that are a 1/4 inch away from it. And we'll go ahead and set up all of our half square triangles in that same fashion. Once you get everything marked and ready to go, I like to just put a pin right in the middle just to keep things in place so that they don't shift around too much. You can put additional pins if you want, but for my purposes, I find that just one right in the middle works out pretty well. Now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to sew our seams. Now on my particular foot, a 1/4 inch lines up with the edge of I'm using a walking foot, and a 1/4 inch lines up with the edge of that little ledge right there. So I'm going to line that up with the line and just sew right down the center and keeping everything lined up as best as possible. And we're going to do this on all of the half square triangles that we need to make. I don't like to sew over the pins. Some people do. It's just not my thing. I've just I encountered too many needles breaking to even chance it. But once you get to the end, you're just gonna go ahead and leave your thread unclipped, and you're gonna turn all of the pieces around and do the exact same thing on the other side of those center lines. Now, once you get done sewing those, take it back to your sewing mat and you're going to go ahead and cut all of those apart. Once you cut them apart, we're going to take that center line that we marked from earlier and we are going to cut right on that center line. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. I like to use a rotary cutter. Rotary cutters, I feel like, are a crucial sewing tool that everyone should have. It's also a good idea to keep that blade sharp. I need to change it because it did not cut all the way through, and that is a red flag that nobody likes. But you'll go ahead and you will cut right down that center line, and if your blade is sharp, you can cut multiple at the same time, kind of like this. Just line them up and use a longer ruler. But yeah, my blade is not the best. But once you get all of those cut, we'll go ahead and get our blocks pressed, and we are going to press the seam over to the darker side of the fabric. Now, there will be a couple of these later on that you might have to press in the other direction, but to begin with, we're going to go ahead and press them in this particular fashion. So go ahead and repeat that on all of your half square triangles. Another thing to note is if you are sewing or doing a quilt pattern and they say HST, HST also stands for half square triangle. Just a little tidbit there I thought I would throw in for future reference. But now, once you've got everything pressed and ready to go, one of the things that I'm trying to get into a better practice with is trimming down my blocks. It really does help to make sure that everything is squared up and ready to go. But what I'm doing on this is I cut my material 4.5-inch square at the beginning because that's what size my little ruler is. But for the quilt block, we're going to go ahead and cut everything down to 4 inches. Now, I had to adjust my camera because it was a little far away, but so I apologize about that. But I like to line up that diagonal with the diagonal that is on my ruler and just trim that up nice and square. And it really, really does help everything line up at the end. You're going to go ahead and repeat that on all of your HSTs, and you're also going to do that on the plain squares. Now, if you're going to be using some of your half square triangles in the center, you're going to want to trim all of those down. You just want to make sure that everything that you're about to sew in the next step, make sure everything is the same size, whether it is just a plain square or a half square triangle. It's one of those things too where I do know that the trimming process is kind of tedious. It can also be tedious along with the pressing or ironing process. But again, I've been so chaotic with it for so long, and I do know that it makes a difference. I just sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't have time for all of that. I'm trying to get the thing done, but it really does help. Once you get everything squared away and squared up like that, like I said, I'm going to go back and I am going to do that on my plain squares. And again, I could have done this in the beginning and I probably should have, but sometimes when you're doing the HSTs, sometimes it may not end up the size that you think it will. There's a lot of different factors like your seam that you sewed, things like that. So I just kind of wait until right before assembly before I trim everything down. Now I got my chart back out to make sure that I had all of my directional fabric facing the way that I needed it to. So now you're going to put everything together like a puzzle. And this is probably this is the most fun part for me because I love puzzles. Even though it's like the easiest one ever, it's still fun. And it was right about here where I realized that I did make that crucial mistake on the directional fabric. So the two that I have missing, I needed to make the diagonal in the other direction. And that was something I did not account for at the beginning. But again, that is why I made extra squares so that if something does happen, I just got to back up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do the HST process again, but I'm just going to do the diagonal on the other side. So this is what we want. We want the directional fabric here in the corner, and this is what we want versus the opposite. Hopefully that makes sense, but yeah, we're going to go and fix that up, and we'll get our HSTs back to where they need to be. So now I've got everything squared up and back how it needs to go. We're in the home stretch. All we got to do is just assemble it. I like to do the columns first. Some people may like to do it a different way, but the way that I like to do is I will do the columns and put these together on this first row with a little clip, and then we will sew that together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, chaining all those together. Once you get that done, you'll go ahead and take your third column and lay that like this, and then you're going to do the same process, clip and sew or pin and sew. And then once you get that one done, you'll go ahead and do the fourth column, same process, pin and sew. And then once you get done with that, this is what you should be left with. Now all of these are nice and connected, so nothing's just flying around. It's because we don't want anything flying around. Now to sew the rows together, what I like to do is I like to do my little seam dance. I don't know why, it just kind of works out that way, but what we're going to do is we are going to press the seams in opposite directions on each one of these rows so that we can nest our seams and we can nest all of the intersections and they're nice and crisp. So normally whenever you're sewing, the fabric is going to tell you where it wants to lay. So like on this particular row, it wanted to lay over here on this side. So I decided to press it on that side. Press this row, and then the row right above it, we are going to press the seams in the opposite direction. And you want to make sure that you're not like moving your iron around too much. You just want to go ahead and take your time with pressing and just kind of lay it there and let the heat do its thing. You don't really have to do too much. But yeah, y'all like my iron. It's still new to me. I know I've had it for a little while now, but I am so excited about this upgrade. You just have no idea. I've been wanting one of these little irons for so long, and I'm still enjoying it so much. But yeah, you'll just go through all your rows, press the seams opposite on each row. I'll give you a close-up on how I nest my seams once we get done with the pressing process. So now basically the last part of the assembly is putting the rows together. So now what you're going to do is you're going to fold pretty sides together, and you're going to take your opposite seams and you're just going to have them lay together just like that. I like to put a clip or a pin in each one of those intersections to keep everything nice and tight and crisp. But I'll show you one more time over here. You can just see how when we press them opposite, they just kind of lay flat, and I think that's awesome. And you're going to repeat that for all 3 of the rows that you have to do, and everything should lay nice and flat because we did that pressing process. So now we're going to take our rows to our sewing machine, do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, bring it back over, and this is what we've got. Now, isn't that just adorable? I think that this turned out really, really nice. Now, you will see on that second row right there that there is a little bit of extra overhang. What that's going to be is that is your seam allowance for whenever you attach this to another piece of material. Most of my intersections turned out really, really nice. This one, I'm still trying to get better with it. I'm not perfect. I don't think anything that I make will ever be perfect, but I do feel like I'm getting better at it. But yeah, this is a nice fun block that can be used for any sort of project and very appropriate for Valentine's. Appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.